Good morning, everyone. My name is Daniel Shibley. I've been working with the National Park Service for about 10 years, and my background is in cultural resources management and landscape architecture. And I wanted to say that on a personal note, coincidentally, just last night I finished a biography on George Washington. So I'm not making that up. It was about 800 pages by Rod Chernow, George Washington, A Life. And it's really the first time that I will count that I've been out here. The previous time I had 2 crying kids with me. So I hope to be able to, enjoy the grounds while I'm here. It's a very significant spot in the life of George Washington. The presentation that I've got here today is on a topic that within the Park Service, probably, within a lot of federal agencies, is not something that gets a ton of attention, but I think it's an important topic, and that's visual resources management. Specifically, the project that I worked on regarding visual resources management was along the northern George Washington Memorial Parkway. I think everyone that is here, being drawing from a pretty local crowd, is somewhat familiar with the George Washington Memorial Parkway. If you're not, you can pretty much look out the window and catch a glimpse of it. But it was designed to be kind of a living memorial to George Washington, kind of a kinetic, kind of modern memorial to George Washington that would go from Mount Vernon all the way north, as originally conceived, to the Great Falls of the Potomac. That build out took about 40 years, and it was never completely realized. In the end, the northern terminus wound up being the Capitol Beltway. The area that I worked on was the northern 7 miles of the George Washington Memorial Parkway, from the Capitol Beltway to the Spout Run interchange. This section of the parkway is about 7 miles in length, and it was constructed largely in the mid-1950s and was completed in the mid-1960s. So from 1957 to 1965. The area that really most of the vistas are located in is the area that's closest to the Potomac, views that look out over the Potomac River Gorge, from Spout Run in the southern extent of my study area up to the Chain Bridge, about 3 miles north. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about the background for the project and what caused the project to occur. It was about 10 years ago. There was planning that was done for the rehabilitation of this stretch of the parkway, and they were looking to do things like mill and repave the travel lanes, but they were also looking at safety improvements and kind of safety modernizations along the parkway. And you'll notice in this photo, you've got this historic guard wall that runs down the northbound lane of the parkway. And it's a guard wall that you wouldn't see if it were constructed in modern, conventional construction practices. For one, it's stone masonry with no reinforced concrete in it. And for two, it's actually quite short. It doesn't meet conventional standards for what a guard wall would be. In some areas, it's as short as only 9 inches tall. So when they were looking at it, the road engineers thought that this was, prohibitively small and not reinforced enough. So the proposal was to replace the historic guard walls with reinforced concrete with stone veneer, and also to have them be a minimum height of 27 inches. This got pushback, internal pushback, and pushback from the public at large. And one of the big questions was, if you take a wall that's sometimes as low as 9 inches, raise it to 27 inches, what are you doing to the views along the parkway? Are you going to be obstructing those views? And the connectivity, really the driving force behind the creation of the parkway, between access to the scenery adjacent to the parkway. So when they realized they had an issue, they kind of put the project on pause, And many years later, it was determined they needed to do a scenic assessment of the Northern Parkway, which is what brought me into the project. So visual resources, I think, within the Park Service, we've got a lot of scenic land within the Park Service. I think it's often kind of taken for granted that we have it, even though if you ask people why they're visiting parkland, it's often specifically for that scenery. But really the question is, aside from the incidental fact that we do have this scenery, what should we be doing as land managers to manage that scenery? How do we manage scenery? What are the things that we would do to manage scenery? And really, do we have to manage scenery? Is this something that that really needs to be on our radar? And as this slide shows, now if you ever go to a Park Service presentation, it's almost guaranteed to include the Organic Act. It's pretty much always in there, and we just harp on this thing. It's almost 100 years old at this point, and it really provides us with our reason for existence and our mission. And this doesn't get a lot of attention, but written right into there is a mandate to conserve park scenery. So this is as foundational as you can get within the Park Service, and it says right there we need to conserve scenery. Another thing you look at within park units is the enabling legislation for parks, and in this instance we've kind of got a dual mandate, because we've got the Organic Act, of which we derive everything from, and then the congressionally authorized enabling legislation says for the George Washington Memorial Parkway, which is the Capper-Crampton Act, that one of the reasons for its existence is to include the protection and preservation of the natural scenery. So yes, we are expected to manage scenery within the Park Service. So how do you assess scenic quality? How do you go about doing that? What are the things that you look at? You need a model. You need something to use to go out and assess scenery. And scenery is a little difficult because it's inherently subjective and kind of a slippery thing to try to quantify and measure. But here's some things that you would look to do in a model that you would create. You try to incorporate those scenic intangibles, the experiential quality that you get when you look out upon something that's scenic. You'd want it to be replicable, something that can be reproduced and have similar results. You want it to be transparent, not driven by any bias, and using objective criteria. Ultimately, you'd want it to produce a rank of scenic values, something that you would be able to use and create a scenic hierarchy, ultimately to inform management decisions and expenditures about how you're going to manage a given area. And at this point, the Park Service just doesn't have a standardized model. Other land management agencies do. I think the Park Service is behind us because we generally don't do as much or allow as much as other land management agencies like the Bureau of Land Management or the Forest Service, which have heavily resource extractive activities that occur on their land, where they often, if they do a clear cut, they're going to hear a lot about impacts to scenery from an adjacent community. We don't have those issues as much, so we're a little bit behind, but nevertheless, it's something that we are starting to consider more within the Park Service. So what do we have? We've got Blue Ridge Parkway, which is nice because it's another road, a much longer road than the George Washington Memorial Parkway. They did a lot of really excellent work dating back to the 1990s. Yosemite, where I worked previously for about 7 years, and I worked on this plan while I was there. They did a scenic vista management plan that was completed around 2010. And then we've got, and I apologize for all the acronyms up here. This is kind of Park Service jargon, but DSC stands for Denver Service Center. They do a lot of design work within the Park Service, and this is new and exciting for us. They just recently kicked off a group dedicated to scenery conservation, and they are working on developing a model. However, this project that I worked on was being done in tandem with them kind of trying to work out the kinks in a Park Service-wide model. So what did I do? I'm familiar with the Blue Ridge Parkway model, which most of the things were replicated in the Yosemite approach. But I was also on a panel that was working and advising with the Denver Service Center group. So I incorporated elements of the Denver Service Center model into other models that had already been used in the field. And I created kind of a hybrid approach to documenting vistas along the Parkway. This image, I can't remember what bridge this is. I want to say it's maybe Gulf Branch Bridge along the Northern Parkway. This is during non-rush hour times, but we were out there, with traffic. We didn't have we were all wearing vests, and we were trying to keep our heads about us. But it was a little bit daunting, especially at first when you hop out of the car and you're on a bridge and you got cars whizzing by you, and you've got to do these assessments. The assessments that we were working on, it was what we called them was a visual resource assessment. So we had different criteria. On the bottom, you can see the field forms that the people in the photograph are using, where they're assessing these different types of criteria and assigning a score to these to these different criteria. We deliberately used an interdisciplinary team to attract different perspectives and not have it all be Park Service or all federal highways or all public. And in the end, we had a mix of public, Park Service, and federal highway staff, a team of 8 people that would do these scores. We'd then tally them all together, divide them by 8, and the average score would determine the kind of the scenic rank that each vista would get. So all in all, we had 38 contemporary vistas that we identified along the Northern Parkway. So that team that you saw, we went out and assessed all 38 vistas. We did scores. Some of the things required, some of the scoring actually took place in the office. I'd say the majority of the scoring took place in the field. And within those 38 vistas, there was about 7 to 8 for each category. The top 20% were considered the superior scenic vistas, scenic class of vistas. The next 20% was high, medium, low, and very low. So each got kind of assigned to a scenic class. These photographs are kind of representative of what those scenic classes look like in the field. The superior in the upper left, that shows an open vista that usually has a charismatic built feature included in it. So those didn't tend to be just the ones that had the natural splendor, but if it had the Washington Monument in it, Georgetown University in this instance, maybe Key Bridge, something like that, those vistas were the highest scoring. So it had a complementary built feature, but still open access to the river. For the high classes, those often had really excellent connectivity to the river, but maybe no charismatic complementary built feature. And then medium, low, and very low, those you start to get into more obstructed vistas, not as great connectivity to the river, generally no charismatic built feature to complement the vistas. And that's kind of how things broke out when all the scoring was tabulated. I don't have time to go over all of the criteria that we used, but here's an example of one that's fairly easy to wrap your head around, and that is uniqueness. So with uniqueness, you're looking for things that are one of a kind. If it's a vista that you can experience from 20 different vantage points along the Parkway, well, if you've got one, you've got 19 others that you'll get a comparable vista from. It's not as important. Whereas if there's one vista that you're able to see the old post office from, that becomes a more important vista and one that would warrant greater management intervention to preserve. So the concept of uniqueness was one that was scored. It's also, like in the upper right picture, you see Washington Monument. That's the first glimpse you get of the Washington Monument moving south. So that's the one, if you've never been to DC before and you're driving along there and you've seen this thing in pictures and all of a sudden it's there, that becomes a really memorable experience for you. The one on the bottom right, while scenic, is a vista that is generally characteristic of the visual experience along the Northern Parkway and is not considered unique. This next criteria, this one, we probably spent twice as long trying to score this one as we did for all of the other categories combined. This one was a really the doozy for us. And that's because we didn't have anything that really told us where the historic vistas were. We didn't have any plan that said, these are the vistas that are intentional, that we designed the Parkway for. We knew vistas were considered. There was a lot of documentation of that. We didn't have anything saying where they were. So we spent a lot of time trying to sleuth out where these vistas are. This section of the Parkway was dedicated in 1961, so that was kind of our baseline. If a vista was present in 1961, then it would score some points, but we also wanted to see documentation that that vista had been maintained, that it was deliberate and not something that was incidental to when they did the grading for the Parkway. So those were kind of our two scoring criteria for this vista. And we had to do a lot of detective work to score them. This shows some historic photographs along the Northern Parkway. And within these, you can get a feel for where, a vista frame is largely determined by, is there vegetation present or no vegetation present? If there's no vegetation present, you're going to be able to see out over the Potomac. So we had maybe like 30 or 40 historic photographs, and we placed them in the landscape by looking for guard walls. Guard walls were our big determinant, and we came up with a numbering convention for those guard walls, which is shown on these historic photographs, and kind of overlaid where they were, and then would often, and to be honest, there was often a direct correlation between guard wall, which were put up in steeper areas that may have had to have been graded during the construction of the Parkway, and where vistas were historically present and still contemporarily present. So there's a strong correlation between a guard wall and a vista. But so we did that. Problem with that is we didn't have complete coverage. We had an incomplete data set for historic photographs. So good, but doesn't give you the complete picture. So what do we do next? We look at aerial photography. This was an aerial photograph from 1957. It shows the area during construction. This one was the best of all the aerial photographs. You can see where those view cones are located. They often are associated with like a little divot where the area was cleared of vegetation. You can see that pattern in this photograph better than you can in most. But again, because of all the topographic relief in this area, and a lot of the aerial photographs just didn't have the resolution where you're really able to tell what was occurring with the vegetation or not, or even if it was just shrub cover, low cover. Often in these aerial photographs, it's hard to discern between that and, say, tall tree cover. This alone, again, did not tell us everything we needed. The next source, this was the most frustrating bit of information, because it seemed like when we found this, we thought we had everything we needed. We thought this was going to tell us everything. It turns out it didn't, and in fact was misleading in many ways. This was a map. It's a bit hard to read even with this big projection, because it's actually 5 maps that we tiled together. But this was a base map that a park, I think it was the head of the park tree crew, put together very early on. We were able to date this thing back to almost the dedication of the road. And the little notations that are in pencil, not the red that I superimposed on the map, but that the arrows that they're pointing to are these areas of notation. And those are intended to notate where the vistas were located. Problem is, this was a draft map that was never finalized, and many of the notations, I think, were scribbled hastily on there and never don't actually conform to the way the Parkway is. If you look at the upper left one, that one says open vista between those 2 arrows. That's actually the location of an earthen berm, so there is no vista in that location. When we georeferenced this, it didn't line up. We think what they're actually trying to suggest in that location is that the vista's on either side of that earthen berm, but it's not really very well defined. The next one down to the right, that one shows vistas that actually lined up pretty good, but then there's a parenthetical comment that says disregard. So this really stymied us. We spent a lot of time scrutinizing this and trying to, but in the end it was somewhat inscrutable. But But it was useful data anyways. We compiled all that data, including oral history with long-tenured tree management staff within the Park Service. We compiled all that, and we came up with our best estimate for what the historic vistas were along the Northern Parkway. And this shows those vistas if you're traveling northbound along the Parkway. There are different types: open vistas, canopy vistas, where you're looking through, the canopy of the trees is lifted up, so you're looking through. There's tree trunks, but you can generally see through the trees. And then there's also, what's that, open historic vistas, vistas that we think were there when the Parkway opened, but we have no record that they were ever maintained, so they quickly filled in. And because I'm a landscape architect, I kind of insisted on this. I didn't just want to document the vistas, I wanted to provide treatment recommendations for the vistas and how we would better preserve those vistas moving forward. Some of the research I uncovered determined that because of budget shortages and also because of the inherent danger in doing this work on the steep slopes, the Park Service, for the most part, has ceased maintaining these vistas along the Parkway. For a while, there was consideration of getting contractors to do the work, but that funding has not, and the prioritization for this has not really risen to the level that it's gotten that much attention. But that didn't deter me. I wanted to provide recommendations for a way that the park could manage these vistas. And so what I did was I looked at those superior scenic class vistas and those high scenic class vistas. And for each of those, I tried to get in and do on-the-ground work where I got to the, because you need to quantify your environmental impacts when you're doing this sort of work. What trees are we moving? What's the diameter of breast height of the trees? What's the species of trees? How are we managing this vista? All that. I tried to get in and do quantifiable things that if there becomes an appetite for taking on this kind of work and budget for it, that the Park Service could get in there and do it. So this is one of the overlooks, and this is a treatment recommendation for removing trees, clearing brush, and doing pruning along this particular overlook. So that's it for me. Again, my name is Daniel Shively. I currently work as a project manager for National Capital Parks East. If you look across the Potomac, that's some of our land, Piscataway, Fort Washington, stuff like that across. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Is a lot of the problem with closing in a vista is caused by, it looks like, a lot of alien invasive plants, my favorite topic.
Yes, but not all. It's a lot of it is, and a lot of it is really the main thing that's obstructing these vistas are the vine cover. The vines that have really formed dense mats when they've gotten into the canopy and hung down, largely invasive vines. That if we were just managing those vines and even keeping the trees. In many cases, I wasn't calling for a clear cut for the trees. I was looking to create an opening, prune where we can, and remove trees as needed for the high priority vistas. And just managing the invasive cover and the vines would go a long ways towards opening up these vistas.
Yeah, the vines were what I meant. Like, porcelain vine, bittersweet. Those are
right. We've got wisteria.
Everywhere.
We've got Yep. Yeah.
It looks like your review panel worked mostly standing and outside of vehicles. Were there any views that would be ranked more or less valuable if thought about from a perspective of inside a vehicle and while traveling?
Yes. And we got pushback on it for that reason from some people. We got criticism on it. Are we really replicating the experience if we're standing there and pondering these vistas and spending maybe 5 minutes where you'd be lucky to get 5 seconds in a moving vehicle? You do have to, there is really no way with the sophisticated type of analysis we were doing to replicate that in a moving vehicle, because by the time you tried to consider all of those factors, you would have passed it. We would have had to drive up and down the Parkway maybe 20 times or something like that. So there's precedent for gauging. This is the way the Blue Ridge Parkway did their assessments, stationary, even though they're experienced non-stationary. So yeah, I mean, the other question is, you know, at what height do you want to align yourself when you're doing these vistas? And I would encourage people to drop themselves a little bit so they are better, you know, simulating the experience seated in a vehicle. Yeah. Go ahead.
This is not relevant to what you're talking about there with the east, but Potomac Yard Station on the Parkway, the vistas there. I was curious to know, how did you determine, or how do you determine the vistas from a metro station? Because there was some issues that this metro station would take with some of the vistas.
That's an easy one for me because I wasn't involved in it at all, so I can just you know, the area that I was looking at was the northern 7 miles of the Parkway. Now the remaining, whatever it is, that was about the northern third, so the remaining 14 or 15 miles of the Parkway should be assessed. The driver for this and the funding that was provided for this was that 7 miles was getting rehabilitated. So there was money for compliance and mitigations, and in this term, kind of data gap filling for that northern section. With the Potomac Yards project, I'm not involved in that, but
Well, I guess my question was, would the same criteria be used for that location?
I think it should be. I mean, I think that if you're going to, you wouldn't want to use a different set of metrics to assess scenic quality for the southern section of the Parkway if you've already got an established mechanism that you're using for the northern Parkway, just so you're comparing apples to apples and not apples to something else. So I think that, yes, I think that it should be. I can't speak to, because I wasn't involved in that. I can't, and I know that's an ongoing issue. I can't really speak to how that was done.
Actually, this is kind of a good follow-up to that, I think, because I'd be curious what criteria you would use for measuring visual resources assessment in like Old Town Alexandria, where you have a more built environment along the Parkway, since that's its sort of unique area. And some of these would apply, but perhaps not. So
Yeah.
How would you tailor this differently if you were to undertake that?
Right. Well, with the Parkway, it's a moving experience, right? So one of the criteria that we had for that I didn't go into was duration. How long is the vista open? If it's a vista that you're looking straight onto, that's maybe lined up with a curve in the road, you're going to experience that for a long time because you're probably going to be able to see it for maybe 20 or 30 seconds because you're heading right towards it, and then it moves a little as you turn with the road, as opposed to something that's a gap in the trees for 100 feet that's perpendicular to the road. You're not going to experience that for very long. So that criteria wouldn't make sense for, say, an urban visual experience going through the city of Alexandria that you're experiencing maybe on foot. So this is something that when I was talking about that group at Denver Service Center, the Scenery Conservation Group, this is something that a point that I've made with them, and I hope that they're receiving it, is that whatever model you come up with, you need to maintain flexibility. Because what makes sense in Alexandria is not going to make sense on the Parkway, is not going to make sense for the National Mall, is not going to necessarily, I mean, you want some foundations in place, maybe you want a systematic approach, but the actual criteria that you're looking at, I think you need to have suggestions, and you need to have some things that maybe are exactly the same, but you need to have built into it room for adaptation to capture those things that are of, when we were at Yosemite, one thing we looked at is, where did Ansel Adams take a picture? Where are the areas that are most commonly photographed? That wouldn't make sense for Alexandria to use a criteria. I mean, maybe there's something comparable, but you need to look at, you need to treat each area individually, the type of landscape it is. Is it a road? Is it a campus? Is it an urban core? each I think would be different. So maintaining flexibility. I think there's a desire that we just have one method and we can teach that method and we can get everybody to go out and do it and we'll have consistent stuff. I think that is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So I don't think that's a good approach.
This will be the last question, and then we'll have our break.
Would you be able to identify which of the criteria did your group have the most difference of opinions on? Was there one specific, or was there one that stood out and any others?
Well, the ones that there was the least difference on were the ones that I decided. Some of them I decided because they required too much information, for a team like the historic one. Those got applied to all of them across the board the same because individuals didn't have the time to go in and assess all the historic photographs and look at the aerial, the ones. So the ones that had the most uniformity were the ones that I decided that I applied to all of them across the board. Least was maybe, I don't know, probably there was one called Vividness, which was really the kind of the experiential chutzpah of the vista, the thing that was maybe hardest to really define, but if it's there, it's there, and that one, because we had different things that we'd sort of lead, guide you towards when you're looking at that. Is it a framed vista? Is it a panoramic vista? Is it open? Does it have ephemeral qualities that maybe would make it more appealing during certain times of the year? Is there movement in it? Is there a complementary range of colors? But in the end, these things are kind of hard to quantify. So I think that one is one where you have a range of people, and in the end, I think for me it was very satisfying that the way I saw the vistas were ultimately the way their group saw the vistas. So there was conformity by and large. There weren't any that I was like, geez, that's kind of a stinker, and you guys just voted that as really high, and well, we're stuck with it. No, I mean, these vistas that kind of rose to the top were the vistas that I think probably most people would say, yeah, that's a scenic view. So it did tend to work.
Group of 8, did you have different backgrounds as far as, like, even if they were audience, as far as photography, painters, stuff like that? Because you're going to have different eyes constantly on the Parkway. And I know you were saying earlier about, people take different quality depending on what they're looking for.
Yeah, so we had another landscape architect. We had someone with a natural resources background. We had federal highway planners that were involved, so people that were more from an engineer mindset. We had a guy who has been just a volunteer with the George Washington Memorial Parkway for 20 years and does kind of greets people at trails that was involved. So we had people with kind of like professional relative experience, people that didn't really have that. And the main thing that was important is that you were receptive to the training, which didn't take that long. We went to some areas like across from Teddy Roosevelt Island and looked out at that, and we could spend, an hour talking about that one and going over it. And I made myself available, like, what's this vividness mean again? Can you're out there making an assessment and they had a question about something and I could come up and talk to them. I didn't really encourage people to share scores or have open conversations. That's another approach that you can use with this, is everybody reaches consensus on a score for a vista. But I wanted an approach where people, it wasn't who was the most vocal or who was the least vocal or people that were maybe more engaged or less engaged. Everybody scored it, and all those scores were average. And some people were very generous and some people were very thrifty, and in the end it all kind of washed out. And we had a single score for all the vistas, and it seemed to work pretty good.
Okay, thank you very much.